Chapter 20 in the histology section deals with the histology of the integument, or skin. Fundamentally, skin has two major components to it. It has an outer stratified squamous layer that comprises the epidermis and an inner underlying dermis containing connective tissue. So let's deal with the epidermis first. The epidermis is the outer layer, and it consists of a classic stratified squamous epithelial layer of ectoderm origin, typical of an epithelium. It's devoid of blood vessels. There are always four layers to the epidermis, and if we are in the presence of thick skin, as in the palms of the hand and the soles of the feet, there will be an additional layer called a stratum lucidum. The basal layer, a stratum basal, is the germinal layer, basically because it contains the stem cells that proliferate all of the other keratinocytes that make up the stratified squamous epithelium. So immediately adjacent to the basal layer is the stratum spinosum. This is a multilaminar layer of cuboidal-like keratinocytes that are bound together frequently by extensive desmosomal contacts. And it is in this layer where the autoimmune pemphigoid-related diseases affect the desmosomes that result in various blistering diseases. The third layer, moving outwardly, is the stratum granulosum. Its cells tend to be more flattened and polygonal, and they're filled with basophilic keratohyalin granules that provide a sealant to the epithelium. As we said, only in thick skin will we have a transitional lucid layer of flattened eosinophilic or pale staining cells that have begun to lose their organelles during the process of desquamation. And finally, the outermost layer of the epidermis is the stratum corneum that basically consists of flattened, anucleated, and cornified or keratinized cells. In addition to keratinocytes, which certainly are the dominant cell type of the epithelium, recall that epidermis also contains melanocytes that migrate into the basal layers of the epidermis from neural crest cells, and Langerhans cells, which more commonly are found in the stratum spinosum, which are antigen-presenting cells. This diagram illustrates the various strata that form the epidermis, as well as characterizing the features of the underlying dermis. First off, you can see that the layers of the epidermis begin with the stratum basal, which is in direct contact with the underlying dermis, and then proceed basically to a more superficially situated stratum corneum. In the underlying dermis, we find different arrays of loose, irregular, and then dense, irregular connective tissue. And amongst the connective tissue, we find some accessory dermal structures, including sweat and sebaceous glands. Sweat glands, for the most part, utilize a duct system that passes through the layers of the epidermis to open on to the surface of the stratum corneum. Sebaceous glands are associated functionally with the shafts of hair follicles, as you can see in the diagram. In a histologic stain section, we can see the relationship between the superficial layers of the epidermis and the underlying layers of the connective tissue forming the underlying dermis. The arrowhead points to a relatively stain-free melanocyte that's situated among the cells in the stratum basal. The cells that are intermediate in position in this slide are those rounded or cuboidal cells that are in the stratum spinosum, and then they become flatter as they move toward the surface of the epithelium in the area of the stratum granulosum. Finally, you can see the flattened anucleate, desquamated, or about to be desquamated cells that are most superficially positioned in the stratum corneum.